a couple of echoes ago. And we're going to present on the Individualized Resilience Plan, Blueprint for Success. And can they see the full screen? Okay, good. Is there a way to get the chat box?
Sorry, I'm not doing this.
Oh, okay. All righty. Youth and family definition of resilience. So in 2003 through 2005, we convened a group of youth and families who were working through the challenges of having mental health challenges in their family. And we asked them some very specific questions about what does it take for your family and your child to be resilient and to cope best with living with a mental health challenge. And what they said was that resilience, first of all, they developed their own definition. Resilience is an inner capacity that, when nurtured, facilitated, and supported by others, empowers children, youth, and families to successfully meet life's challenges with a sense of self-determination, mastery, hope, and well-being. That has been the definition of resilience in Ohio since 2005. And the key parts of this is nurtured, facilitated, and supported. And so what we need to be thinking about as we develop plans for kids and families is, how do we nurture resilience through family, faith, and friends? How do we facilitate that resilience through services, supports, and accommodations in our communities? And then how do we support it in our community through community education, opportunities, and resources? What you see on your computers now is our resiliency consensus statement that the youth and families developed. And what you find here are a number of things that are in the resilience literature and a number that are not. A couple of things that the families that I want to emphasize here is that basic needs, safety, and supports is critical to family success. Was reading this morning that Ohio has 3 of the most poverty-stricken cities in the US for kids, Cleveland being #1 for kids. And how can we best help when folks don't know if they're going to be able to live in the same space in the next month, or if they don't have food, or they don't have clothes for their kids to go to school? So these are very significant issues for us in Ohio, and I think it's really important to bring that up, and the families brought that up as well. The parents were very clear that they needed to be validated and valued for doing the best they can in a very difficult and challenging situation, and that we need to approach every parent that we work with in that way. How do we validate? How do we value? I'm reminded when I was in the field doing the work, when there would be a particularly difficult, challenging situation, the parent would say to me, "You think you can do better? You take them home for the weekend." And it was very eye-opening. It's like, oh, wait a minute. No, I don't really want to do that. This is very hard for you, isn't it? So how do we approach working with families that are struggling in a very different way? Sanctuary is a word that actually one of our adolescents came up with, and what he said was, when I'm struggling, melting down, having a difficult time, and he was actually very suicidal off and on, he said, I need a safe place to go and safe people to go to. And so creating a plan of sanctuary for the youth and as well as the families became a very central component of our resiliency consensus statement in Ohio. Justice was another thing that the kids brought up in terms of fairness, and kids have a strong sense of fairness. And we had a lot of kids getting arrested at school who were in special ed classes. And they said, wait a minute, we're in special ed classes because we're not doing well. We need supported, not arrested, okay? And that was some of the messages they were giving us. From the literature, we know that competencies, skills, abilities are certainly things that we need to promote with all of our children. Self-wisdom was another area. One of the youth came up with the phrase, resiliency is knowing when you're falling and knowing how to catch yourself. And so we always loved that. And self-wisdom was, we put that on our list as well. Courage and confidence, just to get up every day, go to school where there's lots of stigma and bullying is very difficult for our kids. And so how do we help them with that, develop that courage and confidence? Certainly positive connections to the homeschool and community is critical, which we'll talk about. And another thing in the resiliency literature is the phrase high expectations and standards. And one of the youth said, I don't like that. And we asked why, and he said, well, I never get pizza on Friday. And what he meant was he was on a point level system. And they had the same level system for all the kids, and if you just didn't meet it, you didn't get the reward. And he said, make a goal so I can reach it. And once I reach it, then you can raise it. And it was like, oh, wait a minute, I gotta write that down. And we've been saying it ever since, and basically we switched it to expectations that maximize potential of the kids that we work with. Contribution and giving back is another key area of resilience. And we found that when given the opportunity to be on the statewide resilience group, the kids blossomed, okay? Kids who were suicidal weren't suicidal at the end. They were giving instead national presentations and being able to share with people what they can learn from them. So having the youth and family point of view is absolutely critical in shaping actually how we help. And that's really the point of today's discussion. Hope and optimism, having a futures orientation, absolutely critical. For families to feel like something will be different, that it's hard right now, but there's hope. And then a sense of meaning and joy. So that's the resiliency consensus statement from the wisdom of youth and families. Here's what the literature says, and I just want to go over this briefly, that it's a simple equation of building more assets. In other words, promoting those things that help kids be successful, skills, competencies, and abilities, having a futures orientation, building more protection into the kids' lives through safe neighborhoods, supportive families, school connectedness, and decreasing risk, and risk-generating environments such as gang involvement, truancy, unsafe family environments. And at the very foundation of all resilience is a safe environment for the youth to grow up in. And this is all generated from Ann Maston's longitudinal study in 2012. Mark Manis, who ran the research department at the Search Institute for such a long time, and then I crafted the slide. So, out of our resiliency group, the youth and the families, particularly, I had a discussion with Marjorie and Terry Garner, and they said, why don't we have in mental health something like the school has for kids, an IEP for mental health? And we thought that was a wonderful idea, and we've been working on it really ever since. So what we want to develop is an individualized resilience plan, a blueprint for success for kids, like a mental wellness IEP that follows the child. What does each person who touches the life of that child need to know about him or her to facilitate their success? Guided by youth and family expertise as the main informants. It identifies the challenges that need supported, whether it's behaviors, emotions, skill set deficits, vulnerabilities, trauma. And it also identifies facilitative responses and supports that promote successful functioning across life domains, such as realistic and achievable expectations. And what you're seeing here is that we've integrated all of what the youth and family shared with us into this idea of the success plan. And it results in a resiliency plan. And what we learned from the Search Institute research was that both the person and the context matter. So as we develop a resilience plan, it's not just about how do we change the person and help the person, but also how do we change the context, the environments which they function in, to help them and facilitate their success regardless of where they're at, whether it's school, home, or community. So diving a little deeper into identifying the challenges to success, youth have both internal and external challenges. And the internal challenges that we want to look at is what are those attributes of the youth that need supported? Behaviors, emotions, skill set deficits, delays. External challenges include interaction or situational triggers. And what we mean by that, it's a list of responses in situations that just don't help. And so we need to avoid those things, right? And those things might accelerate the behaviors. They might trigger, they might accelerate, et cetera. And then certain environments can also do that. So we have to hold ourselves accountable to how we respond as well to when children aren't doing well, okay? So we put this in a nifty slide because Bobby said I had to. She goes, quit writing all those words. Give me a diagram. I said, okay, here we go. And by the way, you do get levity during the presentation. Sorry for that. So the areas are, where are they struggling? Are they struggling with trauma reactivity or limited emotional regulation skills? Identifying these areas. Is it more of behavioral, poor impulse control, or risk-taking? Are there cognitive impairments or maladaptive thinking patterns that are getting in the way? And developmentally, are there skill set deficits, disabilities that challenge the youth that we need to know about so that we don't hold the child accountable for what they cannot do? External challenges, we think about people, negative peers, family conflict, unhelpful responses in any environment, and we're all guilty of that. Places, they might have limited functional success at school, etc. What are the triggering environments? I want to know what those are so we can plan around that. There could be things in their life that contribute to maladaptive behavior like substance use. And of course, the big one is safety and trauma. Are the children safe? Are they getting re-traumatized? Are they living in safe environments? So we dug a little deeper into what are some of the unhelpful responses that we want to avoid if we're going to help kids be resilient. And this is just a quick summary of some of those. Challenging the youth beyond what their ability is. Having a reactive response, which intensifies the situation. Making it or taking it personal. Not letting go, in other words, extending the negative interaction by your interaction with the child. Trying to convince them they need to do something different. Piling on consequences, doesn't seem to work over time. Communication that's not very effective, and then use of force, fear, and threats. So if you find yourself going to that old standby parenting, if you don't do this, blank's gonna happen, usually you get a negative response. So what are some of the helpful responses, you ask? Okay, I'm assuming you asked. Facilitative, assistive, accommodative responses, accommodations in the child's life, being emotionally supportive, being flexible and adaptive. Youth that are struggling with mental health challenges and developmental disabilities need flexible parenting. They need flexible interaction with those who are interacting with them because they respond differently. Focus on understanding the behavior, getting underneath it. If you do wraparound, you do a strengths and needs assessment, that helps you get there. If you're familiar with collaborative problem solving, it's a great way to get underneath, to understand the behavior and then negotiate other solutions. Creating realistic and achievable expectations for the youth, being consistent and predictable, and a strong sense of fairness and a good way of communicating with the kids. So these are all helpful responses. These are some of the things that we want you to be thinking about doing. In terms of the resilience plan components, so if we develop a resilience plan, it doesn't look like a compilation of all the things that are not working for the kid, or the bad things, if you will, and how we're going to focus on those problem areas. We want to focus on what works, what they need to do better. So we'll focus on building skills and assets. We'll focus on building supportive connections across environments. We will look at what accommodations do they need at school, home, and the community to do better. We'll look at creating a set of regulating activities regardless of the environment they're in. Thank you, Bobby Beal. We'll look at creating safety in their life and creating, and as well as resources, and giving them opportunities to give back. So these are all the components that go into an individualized resilience plan. So I've created a mock-up, and it's not really written like a treatment plan, but I wanted to give you an idea of what this could look like. So basic needs and safety. What are the things we need to look at? Well, we need to look at safety and resources. So what do we need to do to create physical and emotional safety? How do we think about what are the risk areas that we need to reduce? And how do we address basic needs and resources, which is really hard to do in a Medicaid-driven environment when those are things that Medicaid doesn't necessarily pay for, and it's the main thing that funds us. Sanctuary. Do we create a sanctuary plan for the youth? It's planned, it's predictable, and it's accessible for that youth. If they're at school, it can't be denied by a teacher or a person that's supervising them. It's sort of like agreed upon by everybody, including the principal and the school counselor and the parents. For parents, it could just be respite. Like, do we have enough respite for this youth and this family? And then access to safe and calming space and self-care for sanctuary. Accommodations and supports across settings. So I'm thinking about kids and being resilient. Well, what are we doing to help them be successful? We need to work on the accommodations. We need to work on being calm and non-reactionary in difficult situations. We need to think about cueing and predictability. And something in the right corner that is, being blocked. Supports and connections. They have supports and connections across. It's okay, relax. Competency, skills, and abilities. And you can see what some of those are. Regulating activities under competencies and skill building. And then wellness and developmental growth. So what you can see here is we're focusing on areas to build, not problems to address. So what are the implications for practice? We need to change our perceptions about how we help. We need to have cultural humility. We need to have hope and positive expectancy for the kids that we work with and the families. We need to never give up on youth and families. We need to change our focus. We need to focus on adaptation, functioning, compensatory strengths and abilities. We need to change what we offer. Not only treatment, but resources, supports, activities, opportunities for our kids, physical and sensory regulation. We have to change how we serve and where we serve. How do we make sure that the families have access to what we give and how we help and how to make sure it's available 24/7 and it's responsive. And we need to expand who provides the help, including peers, informal supports, mentors, faith community. And then lastly, we need to change how we support families in terms of validating their experience, they're doing the best they can, and then supporting them through advocacy, system navigation, and parent-peer support. I'll end with this. The problem with the world is that we draw the circle of our family too small, Mother Teresa.